Very excited today to introduce you to Ruth Wageman. She is one of the foremost scholars studying and working with teams. Ruth is a field and sorry, there we go. Ruth is a true expert in the field, and I've read lots of her stuff and came across her in searching for my own idea on successful teams. And I thought, I have to have her come to Scrum Masters of the Universe and speak to all of you because what I'm reading here, what I'm seeing here, this stuff is amazing. So she has done a lot of research that is really helped to shape our understanding of what makes teams successful. So Ruth believes that all our greatest aspirations and all of our most wicked problems will only be addressed through brilliant collaboration. Her research, her teaching, and practice focus on the designable features of a team that collectively result in superb performance. So Ruth has studied and mentored leadership teams whose purpose is to solve complex problems, lead system transformations, and she's showing her screen, so now I can't talk anymore because I lost my notes. I've said a lot though, Ruth.
I think you've said quite enough, actually. Thank you for your gracious introduction. I appreciate that.
Have I said enough to introduce you, Ruth?
I think so.
So everybody, let's give a warm welcome to Ruth. Thank you so much for being here, Ruth, and we're so glad. And I'm going to turn it over to you because that's why we're here.
It's a pleasure, Jamie. Thanks for the introduction. Anybody who's willing to put their face on screen, I would welcome a chance to be actually talking to people, and lovely to see all of you who have. It's really great to be here. I think I'm among a group of fellow travelers, really engaged in trying to create workplaces that build a context for brilliant collaboration, for empowerment, for real accomplishment. So it's really a delight to be talking with you today. I'm going to be talking about what I call the science and the art of designing teams, the science and the art of great teams. And I'll give you a sense in a moment of why I talk about both the science and the art. But I just want to begin by asking, let's do that. As you're just becoming present to thinking about what does it take to create a really brilliant collaboration? How do you get a great team? I want to just do a little thought experiment with you and have you think about either the best team experience you have ever had or the worst team experience that you have ever had. And as you're thinking about those, why would you characterize it either as a good experience or a bad experience? And then what do you think it is that contributed to making it the best and making it the worst? And I'm asking this for a reason, because I think our assumptions about what drives what, of course, our understanding of causes of dysfunction or of positive processes in teams drives a lot of the choices that we make in how we intervene and how we try to support the development of better effectiveness, better performance, better collaboration. So my invitation to you is just to enter some of your thoughts about that into the chat as we go. And let me just, so please go ahead and do that. I'll be just looking at your responses as they come in. And let me just give you just a quick overview of where we're going in this conversation. Plenty of opportunity, I think, to chime in and ask questions. But basically, I want to make this point, which is that teams have enormous potential. When you put a collection of people together, the possibility of what we tend to call synergy, of a team being able to produce something, create something, invent something that is better than what anyone could have done alone, that potential is enormous. And in many instances in organizations, the kinds of things we're trying to accomplish really cannot be done by an individual working alone, has to be done in collaboration. And at the same time, teams often disappoint us, right? So there are, what I'd like to argue on the basis of our research on this subject is that very often teams and the performance context in which they operate are badly designed for collaboration. And therefore, the teams that we're trying to support wind up failing to live up to their promise. I'm hopefully going to be offering you some insights from reliable science, between Richard Hackman and I and our many students and colleagues at various universities over the years. I think there's pretty well understood science about what it takes to have a great team, and at the same time, there is a tremendous amount of art, a really context-sensitive, complex intervention to be done to bring that science to life in the way that we actually create teams and organizations. So fundamentally, that is the arc of what we're going to be talking about today. And the reason I was asking you to think about your best and worst team experiences is this last point about the science and art. Like, where do you start in your intervention in teams in order to enable their effectiveness? Thanks, Andrea. So all the points of dysfunctions, yeah, we see in the worst teams, we see a lot of indications of things like conflict or lack of accountability. Denise, thanks. Not enough people to do the work. Very different kind of account for an ineffective team. So as you're reading the comments of your colleagues about what is a great team experience, what is a poor team experience, what contributes to that, I want to be thinking about what the implications are for how we intervene, and what we really need to know and know how to do, and what team leaders need to know and know how to do in order to make our lives as interventionists a place, as Jamie indicated in the introduction, a place where we actually could be spending our time taking solid teams to greatness rather than spending our time and energy rescuing teams from dysfunction. That's sort of my mission in the world, which is to get as many people as possible to know the fundamentals about how to have a great team. So here's what we've been up to in our research, and I'll come back to your comments in the chat shortly. In theory, teams can certainly do things far better than individuals working alone. That's not universal. There are some things individuals are better at. But just to give you a sample of these kinds of ideas, I work with a lot of leadership teams, and having a solid team, an interdependent team in which multiple people are paying attention to what's going on in the larger world and thinking about the implications for the enterprise and bringing that intelligence to their work as leaders happens much better than when you've just got a chief executive or a strategist who's paying attention to that. Teams are much better at balancing polarities. So a lot of the teams I work with these days have to be both delivering in the present and thinking about innovation and invention that is going to enable the future. Those are polarities, they are tensions. Individuals tend to resolve them in one direction or the other, pay attention mainly to the urgent versus pay attention to what we need to think about the future, whereas teams really can deploy their resources quite flexibly and sustain those tensions where they are real and they actually exist. Very simple argument, the more people you have, theoretically, the more you actually get out of the group. The reach of networks and the ability of teams to actually engage many others in thinking and action, being a place where we as individuals, at least theoretically, can grow and learn as a consequence of working with others. And yet in reality, what we have seen in the research literature over and over is that teams, for all their promise, very often don't live up to it. They underserve at least some set of their key stakeholders, the users of their work. They get stuck in processes where they are excessively risky or excessively conservative in their decision-making, right? The social process pulls them in an unhealthy direction. Team members alienate each other rather than actually engaging and raising the motivation of their colleagues. They may act in ways that induce that sort of free riding, or what social psychologists would call social loafing. They don't actually live up to their promise, and many of them get worse over time. The data I'm sharing here on the side are about our global sample of leadership teams, in which we found that only about 21, not even a quarter of the leadership teams out there are actually superb teams that really deliver for their stakeholders. Far more of them are mediocre at best, and many of them are seriously underserving their stakeholders and getting worse and worse over time. So how do we understand that? And what is it that we can actually do about that if we care about making a difference in enterprises? So I want to open up a poll here with Jamie's assistance and give you some options for thinking about the kinds of interventions that we can engage to make a difference in the effectiveness with teams. And there are certainly others that I haven't characterized up here. But if you were to think about a starting point for making a difference in all those dysfunctions I described, where would you start? Would you start with the team leader and the relationship of the team leader to coaching the individual members? That's one option. A second is to work with the team around their processes and the way they interact with each other, particularly in ideation sessions, to develop psychological safety, to enable people to feel free to take risks. That's the fundamental idea of safety. A third option is resolving conflicts that may exist among the members, clearing out the underbrush that gets in the way of collaboration. And then the final option here is making sure the purpose of the team is compelling and putting together a small team of people, keeping them together long enough to accomplish something. So just give you a moment there to say, I didn't give you multiple options. It's a single choice here. If you were to prefer one, please enter your choice there. And we'll just take a look at the trend in the room. And I want to speak about the nature of these different kinds of theories of intervention and what we've learned about them. So let me give you just a 30 seconds here more. And Jamie, whenever you feel like you've got a good.
Looks like we have about maybe half of the people responded.
All right. Let's just give it 10 more seconds here for getting just a little bit more of the sample here. And when we're about 70 or so, let's take a look at the results.
I think we can. We're at 78% participated.
Great.
That work for you?
Sure. Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
The worst team is not on the same page, looking out for themselves, no trust, open feedback. All right, so we have a focus on the leader-member relationship at about 15%, dominant influence here around developing psychological safety, particularly if you're working with teams whose purpose is innovation, the notion that it has to be a safe place to generate and to speak your ideas, where taking risks or making mistakes is not punished. Got it. So working directly with the team to develop safety, definitely coming in as the winner. Number 4, the purpose and composition and stability of the team coming out second, and then last, the resolving existing conflicts. It's always interesting to me to see the patterns in these data. You know, there was a period of time when that third option, conflict resolution, would have been the dominant process intervention approach for working in teams. That was true in organizations for a very long time, I think, until many practitioners discovered that they were solving a problem that kept coming back, and that kept coming back, and that kept coming back. So let me just speak to these different ideas that are here around intervention and what we've come to understand from the science of teams. I want to draw a distinction here between these first 3 methods of intervention and the fourth as a theory of intervention. The first 3, as I see it, are really going directly at the team process. It's going at the dynamics or behavior or relationships in the way that people work together. In this first case, between the leader and the individuals. In the second case, in the whole dynamic of the team. In the third case, it might be with particular individuals who are engaged in that conflict. This is a theory of intervention that says, if I can orchestrate healthier processes in the team, if I can directly get them to behave in ways that are functional rather than dysfunctional, that gives me a great deal of power to improve the effectiveness of teams. The last one is a little bit different in character, and that's the one I'm going to be the kind of thinking I want to make the case for here today. And that is that the dynamics you see in teams, functional or dysfunctional, are actually driven by features of the structure, the design of the team itself, and of the performance context in which it operates. So the things that we're concerned about with low psychological safety and trust, or ineffective leadership relationships with each of the members, actually have root causes in the structure. And if we don't deal with those things, those kinds of things we're intervening in around the dynamics are going to come back again and again. So allow me a few moments to make that case, and then I'll invite you to chime in. What I'd like you to do as you're listening from this point is to be thinking about a team that you care about. It could be a team that you're a part of, could be one you lead, could be one that you're coaching. And just to sort of run these ideas through your head around that particular team and see what resonates for you in this idea of structural drivers or creating conditions. So what I want to do is to start by illustrating a very common, to me, probably the most common driver that I see of dysfunctional teams and organizations. And I'm going to characterize these as a series of tripwires. And as I talk about the tripwire and illustrate it, I will also show you the condition from our research that actually addresses each of these tripwires. And as that unfolds, you'll get the full framework and the ways that we think about this work. So tripwire one. Many times when we go into organizations and we get requests to help with my team effectiveness, we're actually being invited to support something that is not actually a real team. There are many things that we do in organizations for other reasons that make it impossible to actually have a real team in an enterprise. So my observations, why many of the things that we call teams are not actually teams. For one thing, we call things teams for the sake of inclusivity, but we actually manage people as a bunch of individuals who can move in and out of the work at will. So, for example, very often when I talk to a chief executive or other senior leader about their team, and I ask the question, who are the members of your team? The answer that I get is, well, I have 16 direct reports. And the way those individuals are managed is not as a collection of people who have a shared accountability, but rather as individuals with very clear individual roles, very clear individual measures of their performance, goals, objectives, consequences attached to the individuals. Secondly, excessive inclusiveness. We very often see in enterprises, rather than creating a small, nimble team with shared accountability for solving some organizational problem, we think about this intervention is going to affect these 15 areas of the organization. So I'm going to make sure that there's somebody representing each of the areas of the enterprise. And then when they come together, those individuals already have been signaled and feel that their job individually is to represent their part of the enterprise. It's not to be a member of a team that collectively are going to figure out the best solution overall. And finally, the thing I think that I think is probably the biggest driver of this is we create structures and systems in organizations, like the titles that people have, like reporting relationships and performance management systems and structures that directly impact what we wind up with as a quote team. So who's on your team? I have 18 direct reports being a common answer. Those things tend to drive team composition, not, we'll get to this in a moment, the question of what is the work that requires collaboration and who can actually contribute to that collaboration and really work interdependently to accomplish it. That's not what we're getting. What we are getting is all the people who are of the same job title, who belong to the same department. That's the nature of how teams actually get created in organizations, far more so than thought about the work itself. One of the reasons that I am a fan of agile practices is the focus on the work, right? The work itself the degree to which it is designed interdependently makes actual sense to be done by a team, and the way that it is organized to actually use teams where teams actually make sense. So in describing this tripwire, I want to show you one of the behavioral consequences of creating teams in name only. So take a look at this relative percentages of what leadership teams do when these individuals come together for a meeting. What's the nature of the work they're actually doing? Does it look like a team when they convene? This is an illustration from one particular team, but it's a very typical pattern. 55% of the time that they are in the meeting is just individuals presenting information about what's going on in their individual areas. That is not a team providing consultation to each other, coordinating an initiative together, making decisions collectively, producing things together. All right, so the consequences of the way that, quote, teams get designed in organizations is a tiny fraction of what they're actually doing is any kind of collaborative work, right? So a lot of things are actually falling through the cracks that would, in fact, be better done in collaboration with each other. So you got the basic logic here. Like, we put conditions in place, certain kinds of dynamics arise as a consequence of that. In this case, it's a lack of interdependent work. And then we come in and try to change the behavior or the process that we're seeing that is worrisome. And what we have left in place is the actual structures or the conditions that have created the dysfunction in the first place. So in our research over the years, we arrived at this, what I'm going to argue is a conditions thinking way of framing what it takes to have a great team. We arrived at this interest in asking the question, what are the designable features of teams and their performance context that collectively stack the deck in favor of getting functional processes, of getting an effective team? This is the state of the literature when we started this work, that we see a lot of evidence that certain processes are consistently related to team effectiveness. So you named some of yours in your best and worst team experiences. Very high conflict tends to undermine teams. High levels of trust tends to be associated with higher levels of performance. The problem with that becoming a useful set of observations is that meta-analytic studies looking at the relationships of behavioral dynamics to performance and looking at coaching interventions aimed at changing those dynamics, we see no evidence of improvement in the performance effectiveness of teams. Now, that to me is a wake-up call, right? If we're observing all of these correlations and we're acting on those correlations as if they're a map to making a difference, and they're not making a difference, it either means that we're inept as interventionists or we're actually focused on the wrong thing. And so we undertook to ask a different question, really much more focused on what I would call the root causes for team effectiveness. And that is a focus not on the processes per se, but really asking what are the designable conditions that we as team leaders or as team members or as sponsors of teams can intentionally put in place that reliably result in great teams. So you got the logic of how that is actually different. I will give you an image in a minute of what that would actually look like for us as interventionists. But here's just the quick overview of how we've gone about this. Instead of focusing on the behaviors and dynamics per se, we have been focusing on these designable features of the context. We've done that in many different kinds of teams around the world. And ultimately, this is a clue to why the title, ultimately what we found is that there are 6 conditions that collectively predict up to about 80% of team effectiveness in various different studies that we've done. That's pretty whopping effect size in social science research. And it really is this idea of stacking the deck in favor of a team's dynamics and processes emerging on a healthy path and as a consequence of how they're designed, getting better and better over time. That's the nature of what we have been trying to do in our research and in our practice in organizations. And we've since then developed quite a bit of measurement and assessment practice around that as well, to give us a sort of starting point for intervention in teams. Okay, so let me just lay out the pieces here of how conditions thinking actually helps us as interventionists. So first of all, let's start with, what do we mean by a great team? You know, when I asked you to think about your best and worst experiences, you were thinking about things that you value. It might have been the engagement that you felt, it might have been the accomplishment that the team achieved. But ultimately, what we have been doing is we have been viewing teams through a particular lens where we define effectiveness in three ways. First and foremost, every team has a client or a user of their work, right? They serve somebody, could be internal to the organization, could be external. But ultimately, a team is effective only if they are meeting, or even better, actually exceeding the needs of all their users or all the stakeholders of their work. That's one, I think, fundamental measure of team effectiveness. It's the task performance. Are they creating, producing, deciding what is actually needed by their stakeholders? But secondly, it's not okay for any team in an enterprise. No organizations can really afford for teams to perform brilliantly once and burn themselves out in the process. So to us, a team is not only one that performs once, but it gets better and better over time, meaning it's operating in ways that allow it to get smarter, faster, more sophisticated in the kinds of things that the team can handle. And finally, our third criterion is that the team on balance is actually contributing something. Its impact on the team members is positive, contributes to their growth, their learning and development, rather than undermining and alienating them. So the question is, what does it take to get all this great stuff out of teams? In the short run, these three criteria of effectiveness can actually be trade-offs, right? So when there's a patient on the operating table, we're not going to be worrying about whether we're learning or engaging our members. We're really going to worry about that performance criterion. And in other circumstances, it might be the learning or getting better that is the predominant one. But empirically, these three criteria of effectiveness are positively correlated over time, right? Each of these three is a self-reinforcing aspect of team effectiveness. Okay, so what are we saying about how we as practitioners can influence team effectiveness? This idea of conditions thinking is that these conditions that we create, features of the team, features of its performance context, elicit and reinforce certain kinds of processes and dynamics in the team, for better or for worse. And those ultimately result in those outcomes, those three criteria of team effectiveness. I think that's consistent with almost everybody's model of teams, right? There's inputs, processes, outcomes in a social system. But our point of view is that the real leverage for us to make a difference is actually in influencing those conditions rather than going directly at the processes. That's the fundamental idea and how we study what we have seen in studying teams, but also in the intervention practices as well. So I'm going to just give you a couple of illustrations of how that works. Bring to life the idea of both science and art in our practice with teams by taking you through a few of the conditions, and then we'll break and talk about how this is resonating with you and how it sits with your thinking about your own practice and interventions in organizations. So here we go. Going back to that that fundamental idea, in our research, we found 3 conditions that we came to call the essentials. So these are 3 fundamental building blocks of a team that really must be in good shape if you want to get anything good out of the team. So fundamental design elements that have to be in good shape. and then 3 additional conditions that accelerate the development of that fundamentally well-designed unit into a better and better performing team over time. And I'm going to take you through the essentials, and then and we'll take a break and open things up for dialogue. Again, as we're talking about these tripwires and conditions, have a particular team in mind that you care about and that you support, that we can test these ideas against as well. Okay, so I started with a tripwire. A common design flaw in teams is that what we create are not teams, they're teams in name only. They're loose collections of individuals that are not genuinely interdependent for a common purpose. And I'm going to describe the answering condition, the first of the 6 conditions. It's not rocket science. This is not going to be, I think, a complex idea. It turns out that the complexity is actually in practice. So condition number 1, if you want to have a great team, if you really want to have an effective team that gets better over time, you have to first and foremost create a real team, not a team in name only. And what we mean by a real team, what we've seen in our research, is that a real team has 3 elements. First and foremost, it's clear who is and who is not a member, both to people who are on the team, people who are outside the team. Secondly, membership of that team is kept intact long enough to accomplish something significant together. And finally, interdependence. Members of the team really must interact with each other, exchange information, exchange resources in order to accomplish some shared objective. Bounded, stable, interdependent. These are the characteristics that define a real team. And when you think about how many, let's call them entities that get called teams, that are really hurting on one or more of these characteristics, it's not surprising that in many instances we don't get a lot of energized, interdependent, mutual problem solving, collaborative kind of work, right? How can we learn to become an effective team if we don't know who we are, right? If there's not clear boundaries, if there's consistent moving in and out of the team. This is a design condition. It's a choice. It may not be an easy choice to be put in place, but we can intentionally create a bounded set of individuals together long enough and give them work to do that is genuinely interdependent. So let's talk, that's the science. Let's talk a bit about the art of creating real teams. And I want to give you an illustration about what's involved in the art of intervention. And I'm going to just share with you some of the research from commercial aviation. This comes out of some of Richard Hackman's work. There are a couple of things that we know from research about the performance of these teams, these crews that are flying commercial aircraft together. We know that 80% of the accidents, right, the definition of poor performance in aviation, 80% of accidents actually happen in the first leg of the first time a crew flies together. So we've got a serious liability of newness here, right? The first time a team is working together, we know it exponentially increases the rate of accidents. And there's another piece of research that I think is relevant to this point here, which is a series of studies that were done on the effects of fatigue on errors in flight crews. So the research paradigm was to take crews that had just come in from flying 8 hours together, put them in a flight simulator in a very complex scenario, and count the number of errors that are made in the course of that scenario and the consequences for being able to actually fly out of the situation. And not surprisingly, what they found is that these crews that had just come in from flying 8 hours together made a lot more mistakes as individuals than rested crews who had just been convened for the purposes of going through the flight simulator, had not actually been together on an 8-hour flight. So again, not surprisingly, as individuals, the more tired you are, the more mistakes you make. So reaching for the wrong switch or writing down the wrong number, right? And any of those kinds of errors could be a function of fatigue. But here's the kicker. While fatigued crews actually make more errors as individuals, these so-called rested crews, they've never flown together before, have just gone straight into a complex scenario, they make many more errors as teams, meaning they don't catch the wrong switch or the misreading. They don't catch them. They make fewer of them, but the consequences are much greater, right? The course correction ability of these so-called rested crews who are not yet real teams, the course correction ability is effectively null. So seems like a really practical point that these data are showing us, which is that we should have people flying in commercial aircraft who have had the chance to fly together before, who know each other, who have developed this ability to work together that being a real team allows you. So of course, now that we know it makes such a difference to safety and error rates in commercial aviation, of course, we have standing crews, right? So when you next get on an airplane and you walk down the ramp and you look to the left, you can ask them how long they've been flying together. And what do you think the answer is going to be? The answer is any two people flying together in a single aircraft today are likely not to fly together again on average for another 3.2 years. Right? That's how rare any kind of standing team is in commercial aviation. So, you know, next time you get on the aircraft and look to the left, you might say, hey guys, first time flying together. And the chances are pretty good that it's true. Why is that? Why, if we know that these conditions, putting people together, keeping it as a real team, giving them the opportunity to learn how to be a great team together, keeping them together over the course of at least some part of their career, why don't we do that if we know that one design condition makes such a difference to the performance of teams, you know, with life and death at stake here? And this is what brings me to this issue about the art of intervention, the art of team leadership, the art of intervening in teams. The reason we don't have standing crews is that if you take a little look at queuing theory from the management perspective of airlines, it is way more expensive to roster people as teams than to roster them as individuals. It gives you a lot less flexibility in how you deploy people. And so they have no interest in paying the financial costs of creating standing crews. At the same time, the pilots union is not particularly interested in senior pilots having their choices constrained by being rostered with other members, other pilots who may not have their level of seniority. So simple idea to create a real team if you want to have an effective team, not so simple when it comes to the art of intervention. To actually get standing crews or real teams in many contexts requires not an act of coaching the process of the team. It's actually an intervention. It's a political intervention. It is shaping perspectives, it's exercising influence in the larger context of the organization to change something really fundamental about how people are actually put together in the work that they do. So hence my distinction between the science and the art. The science can tell us what is the thing that needs to be put in place and what are the consequences of that for team process. And we have to develop our own art for actually influencing those things in organizational contexts. And it is not a straightforward thing. So a couple more tripwires and two more of the essentials. And then let's take a look at how this is resonating for you and the teams you think about and your interventions. So a little bit of data here around purposes in teams. Tripwire number 2, very common design flaw that I see with great frequency in organizations is the assumption that we all know the purpose. If the team has a goal, if it's got a metric, if it's got an objective, we know what the actual purpose is. Turns out that having a compelling purpose in a team is more than that. It is more than just having an objective or a number or some metric attached to the work that they do. And it is a challenge for team leaders to actually articulate a compelling purpose for a team. So why is that so hard? First off, it is we have found something of a conceptual challenge to articulate a compelling purpose for a team. There's a tendency to assume that if you know the purpose of the organization, if you know the mission, then whatever the objective is of that team and its connection to the mission is actually pretty obvious. It's not, right? So they're not the same thing, the team purpose and the mission of the enterprise. It's not even the same as the objectives of the unit to which that team might belong, and it's certainly not the same as the individual responsibilities or the individual roles. And yet those are the things that we tend to have a great deal of clarity about, but not at the level of the team. The second challenge, I think, is it's the authority balance beam. This is an issue around, I think, empowerment and authority. A compelling purpose for a team has to be clear, right? It has to orient the team so that they can all be, even when they're not together, operating and moving in the same direction, right? Which requires a certain specification about where we are going. And at the same time, it can't take away the engagement, motivation, opportunity to use their judgment by over-specifying how we're actually going to get there. And that balance beam turns out to be pretty tricky for leaders to pull off. So ultimately, the science says a team has to have a compelling purpose. I'll tell you its characteristics in just a moment. But the actual art of getting something like that in place has to deal with the challenge here of expressing a unique added value for the team. What is it that this team does together, must be done together, that only we can do, that contributes to the success of the enterprise? Now, plenty of teams out there being asked to do things that have only a distal relationship with the success of the enterprise, certainly part of the challenge of the art. But let me just show you a little bit of data from management teams that we had collected in our research. 3 characteristics of a purpose that's genuinely compelling. 1, it's consequential. So whatever it is that we have been asked to do and the way that our existence as a team has been explained has real impact on the lives and work of others, right? That's one of the characteristics that we found. It sustains people's motivation to know that the work that we do, what for better or for worse, is going to have a real impact on others, consequential. Secondly, a compelling purpose is challenging, meaning it requires a stretch of people's capabilities, but it's also not out of the question. It's not beyond the possibility of us achieving it. So getting the balance right, both about challenging, but not impossible. And then finally, clarity, right? It has to be clear about what success would look like for us as a team, were we to achieve our unique contribution to the mission. The data I've shown you here are the average across the sample of management teams that we studied. And to put it in the words of one of the leaders that we shared these data with. So what we do is really, really important. It's going to be tough to pull off if only we knew what it was, right? So lots of different ways that purposes for teams can actually fall short. It's clarity that tends to be an issue for management teams. In other kinds of teams and organizations, it's the consequentiality or the challenge. But this is a kind of recipe that the science tells us makes a difference to what emerges in a team and how effective they are. And the art is in actually helping people to do that well, helping a leader to use his or her authority effectively to create that compelling purpose. We've done a lot of work in our own practice over time. There are lots of different ways, I'm sure, in the art of a compelling purpose, but we've developed a kind of template that I think has come to be helpful to a lot of leaders who are struggling to get this condition in place for their teams. And that is a template that really addresses 3 different aspects of the purpose of the team. Why do you exist as a team, right? What is the unique added value of this team to the success of the enterprise? By what? So what are the pieces of work that you have to do together It's not everything in your job, but what are the critical pieces of work that if you do them together, right, will be better performed and contribute to the success of the enterprise? That's the list of the pieces of work. And then finally, so that, right, this is the consequential piece. If you accomplish that by doing this work, what is the impact that you have on the lives and work of others? And I can share with you some, in the interest of having a little time to talk about this, I'm not going to go through the details of this. You'll see it in the slides. This is an example in a respiratory clinic that was invented, like stood up from scratch when the COVID-19 pandemic first began, and their work around their purpose, and the example that I'm providing you was really about just post the first peak of the pandemic, when these individuals needed to start thinking about not just how do we provide this outpatient care to those who are being affected by this illness, but how do we also capture what we're learning about this novel illness and share it out with the broader system, which caused them to revisit and re-articulate these various aspects of their purpose. Okay, so that was tripwire number 2, which is assume we all know the purpose. Tripwire number 3, again, invitation is to think about your own teams in this respect. Very often we are convening what we've come to call as the wrong people, right? That happens for a variety of different reasons, where rather than composing the team around the question, what's the work that requires a team and who can contribute to that, we take the team that we inherit, right? We see a lot of leaders not questioning, right? All these individuals who report to me are now my team. When leaders discover that there are individuals who are not good contributors to the team for a variety of reasons, it is an enormous emotional challenge to take them out of the team. We have a tendency to pay attention much more to the task skills that people bring and not necessarily to their ability to collaborate together. And so as a consequence, we get a group of people connected to a piece of interdependent work that are not the ideal set of individuals. They're not the right configuration to actually do the work. So let me, I can talk a little bit more if you want to hang around about what we've learned from our research about what constitutes the right people. This is fundamentally the recipe here. But I want to just take you through this idea of what you can actually do about it if you have a team that has not been a real team, that has very little clarity or consequentiality in their purpose and is the wrong group of people convening. In essence, what you've got there is a recipe for the kinds of dysfunctions that we see arising in teams. The conflict as a consequence of not having clear shared expectations or a shared understanding of why we're here. The low levels of psychological safety as a consequence of the conflict around that. What do you actually do about it? What are the implications for a team leader or for us as interventionists if that is what we are dealing with in organizations? And I have seen a lot of practitioners still trying to go directly at the processes that have arisen in these teams. And what I want to draw your attention to is this notion of a team relaunch. It's the last point on the slide here. It is possible in a dysfunctional team that is laboring under poor design around its purpose, its composition, and its stability and interdependence to relaunch that team, to push the pause button, to say this is not working. We actually do need to get some fundamental design conditions right in the first place, and we are going to reconvene and relaunch this team when those essentials are actually in some kind of good shape. So summary here, and then I'm going to just open it now to your reflections and comments and questions. These are the 3 essentials, the fundamental building blocks that must be in good shape if you want to have an effective team. And my invitation to you in thinking about the team that you care about is this, which is, which of these, if any, do you think needs some serious attention in its design? Is it being a real team? Is it having a compelling purpose? Is it having the right people on the team? Are you thinking they actually all need attention about equally, or are they all in pretty good shape? Just to get a sense of, from those of you who are here, where the inclination is around where you, in your experience, most see the kinds of design flaws and how they turn up in teams. So pause there while some of you are continuing to complete that. And I think I saw, Jamie, have you seen any questions pop up that this might be a good moment to address?
One, how do we define if we are successful in creating that great team? What are
how do we do? Well, I go back to those 3 criteria of effectiveness. Are they meeting the needs of their stakeholders? Who are the stakeholders that are served by the team, and what do they think of what the team has actually produced? We don't always measure team performance effectiveness that way. Often there are metrics circulating, and it's really what's pleasing to managers, even if the managers are not actually the client of that team. In our own work, we do that. We speak to stakeholders and get their assessment of team effectiveness, those who practice from this 6 conditions framework. We also have measures in which we ask the team a series of questions that will capture, are they getting better and better over time, and what's the impact of them on the individual members themselves. But I always start from that end of the equation. How is this team doing? What are the symptoms that might be arising in the process side? And then what are the drivers that would allow me to get some leverage on that? So how are we doing, Jamie, on the...
Let's look at the poll. We have 75%, and we'll go back to questions if you have time to stay and answer a few.
I do.
But I'm going to end the poll here and share the results. There you go.
Compelling purpose coming out the top here. Not far behind, real team and right people. Congratulations to you, you 8% who find they're all in excellent shape. That does in fact make your job a whole lot easier, and then not at all unusual for them all to need attention about equally. So given that, it seems to make sense to me to start with compelling purpose and real team. What questions or observations do you have about what gets in the way of a team having a compelling purpose, and what it does to the teams that you work with?
So one question from the chat from Karen is, how can your work be achieved? Like, something that gets in the way is actually, it wasn't Karen, it was Elizabeth. Something that gets in the way is, I'll ask yours, Karen, in a bit, but how do you align an individual's team's purpose to the company's objectives when the team leadership isn't up to snuff, right? If the team leadership is someone who maybe, I don't want to read her words verbatim because they're kind of funny, but maybe I should. But she wrote, if the team leader is a slacker who pawns off her work task to others, Elizabeth,
and calls it delegation, right?
I hope this senior manager is not on this call. But anyway,
I mean, I think I get your general point, and for me, thinking about this conditions thinking way of intervening in teams, the question is, who has the power, who has the authority to shape these for a team? So a lot of times teams have a sponsor that is not the actual team leader or team facilitator, and it's really they who need to do the work of articulating that compelling purpose and the connection of why we decided we even needed a team in order to accomplish the mission of the enterprise. But a lot of times it comes down to not intervening in the team process or anything about that directly. It's educating and coaching team leaders about what it's going to take for them to have an effective team. They get caught in the same trap we do, which is trying to work the process, and helping them to see that they could actually make their jobs a lot easier by creating these positive conditions in the first place. Is a much more, I think, fruitful avenue for making a difference, rather than continually running up against that wall of the leader that is undermining the process work that you've been able to do.
I think Vishal has his hand up. He's had his hand up for a little bit.
Hey, Vishal, please.
Thank you, Jamie. Hey, Ruth, awesome topic, fantastic meetup. So currently, I'm a release train engineer for an art which has 14 teams, 1-4. And the total art strength is about 170 people. The point that you mentioned, that if we are bringing up, or if we are just bringing up people to such a massive number of people and calling them an art is also a team of teams, then no matter what processes, what ceremonies, what coaching practices we try to bring in, they get diluted, or their effectiveness like goes haywire with that amount of people. Yes. So my question, and the initial poll, which was like which really struck, teams, arts, organization, they have to be designed properly so that they will be empowered to absorb the agility, right? Absorb the coaching, absorb the changes that we as a change agents we want to introduce. However, the most difficult, or I think the impossible part to penetrate, is a call for the restructuring, right? For the change agents or the coaches, scrum masters, that authority or that influence is not there in the organization. So whom to coach, whom to talk to, because if we start these topics at some point of time, because whatever meetings that we have, if we need to just rush through all these 10-15 teams, then the effectiveness, the efficiency is out of the door, right? We cannot have it, period, bottom line. There is that particular theory as well about the communication channels. As the number will grow, the communication channel will like expand exponentially, and you cannot have a coordination, you cannot have self-organization, team or team of teams, nothing. How to influence this particular decision making?
Thank you for that question. Great question, Vishal. I personally am really tired of being called in to rescue things that have been badly structured and designed in the first place, and having to kind of redo what should have been done well. This 60-30-10 rule that I'm showing right now is a heuristic that we've developed from our research around where should you put your energy if you care about having effective teams. Where is most of the decision-making and influence located? And what we find is that about 60% of the really critical acts of team leadership occur before the team even exists. It's thinking through the question, what do I need a team or a team of teams for? How will I articulate that in a way that connects people to their contribution and the success of the enterprise? Who can actually contribute to that? What resources will they need? What norms of conduct? It's in all that intelligent preparation before you even launch. And that's the second part, which is that breathing life into that team design in the first convening, in the first few minutes in the life of a team, is what actually gets a team onto a positive or negative trajectory if not done well. And the sort of real-time coaching of the way that people work is only about 10% of what makes a difference. And in fact, what we have found is that you cannot coach a badly designed team to greatness. You can't just intervene in the process and
absolutely
all of the design flaws. Right.
We can only coach the coachable individuals. Same if the teams are like not structured properly, the coaching will not be effective. However, you just mentioned launching well, right? This is pre-launch. Can you please emphasize or elaborate on one aspect that you mentioned earlier? Hit the reset button. How to hit a reset? Yes.
Yeah. That is actually where I'm going. All right. So to me, the point of intervention in a team of teams would be to get the sponsor and whoever's responsible for leading all of those teams together and educate them about this, because you can redesign collectively and go back and do an effective launch. In fact, one of the things that Richard Hackman and I were developing when he passed away a few years ago was what we call a fast team formation process. You can do a really brilliant launch of a team in about 10 minutes, right? You can take your design work and really get a team off to a great start relatively quickly. And for a lot of team leaders, knowing how much team design matters and the fact that you can redo this, not live with a poor team design, it for me is one of the most powerful messages that I share out there, that it is okay to push the pause button, to reconfigure the people, to restart this whole team of teams configuration. And indeed, Vishal, I bet you would find in your work with any team of teams that it's not a static structure anyway. There are times when you need to form a new team or relaunch different parts. And so for me, the discipline and the intervention practice is about educating everyone who is in a position to design and launch teams about these practices and to give them ways of doing that well, and to make it okay to say, this isn't working, we're going to redesign it, rather than to treat that as an error that we now have to live with for the rest of this project. So for you, I think your willingness to exercise influence around, look, if you guys really care about the success of this project, I need to be working with and talking with the people who can make a difference in the setup of the teams. It's a pretty different target, I think, for a lot of us than we've been used to in the intervention work that we do with teams.
Yeah. Hi. Can I dive in a little?
Hey, Tom, go ahead.
I've been listening. First time caller, long time listener. And with an organizational structure that large, and with what I'm hearing is there's a lack of flexibility and authority, that it smells like you're kind of pinned down. That to me sort of, and I'm not trying to offend, it kind of overrides everything that Ruth just said. The team design, the relaunch, the bright spark, the whole thing. If you can't kind of either take a Dr. Grace Hopper approach to exerting that authority, and if you don't know what I mean, it's the forgiveness versus permission saying, or have the ability to get in between the sort of the stakeholder and the teams in order to flex that authority in order to make those changes. None of that stuff is going to be possible if you've got people basically standing on top of you saying, no, you've got 14 plus teams, you've got 170 people, and this is the way we've designed them. It might take a matter of you just simply saying, well, I'm going to take 6 of these teams and try this, and then reorg 6 of the teams, or take 1 or 2 teams, or do something small. But it looks like you may actually have to kind of flex your muscles a little bit to say, hey, look, I'm going to try this, and just kind of let them sort of face you down a little. I know it's tough in larger environments. I'm a Scrum Master of 3 teams, and we're not a large organization.
No.
But I have the ability to basically, from my boss basically said to me, the forgiveness and permission. Just do it until I get a complaint, and then I'll come in and I'll tell you when you can't do it. And I've been able to restructure our teams in a way that they actually collaborate and flow now, and change individuals and change sort of paradigms within the teams. But you got to be able to have that authority to step in there and say, okay, this needs to stop and we need to change.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom, for those insights. I think I really appreciate it. And I think we'll hand it back over to Ruth for where she was going toward the ending. We have just one more question after that to answer, but Ruth, I appreciate all these questions in the chat. I think, running short on time, we're over, and I want to respect Ruth's time as well.
Yes, absolutely. So, and thanks for those of you who stuck it out for a little bit longer. I can stay for a couple of minutes if you have other things that you want to address, but please feel free.
And then that we'll ask, and then maybe I can, we'll just leave it at that. And Ruth, we'd love to hear what else you had.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So what I was playing out here in this slide was really about how we think in our work about what do we mean by team leadership, right? So we just went through the essentials lightly in the course of this morning. There are the 3 enablers: structure, the organizational context, and hands-on coaching. And for us, our point of view on what it takes to have effective teams and what is team leadership is pretty different. It's not about orchestrating the work of the individuals. It's about putting these conditions in place and keeping them in place through the life of the team. That may not all be by one individual, and frequently it's not. So whoever is the sponsor decided we needed a team would be engaging in an active team leadership by making that purpose compelling. And at the same time, another individual who reshapes the information system or other aspects of the context to provide resources the team needs, that is also an active team leadership. And I think about us as interventionists in the same way. Our job is to understand what conditions are not in good shape for the teams that we support and to find the points of leverage where we can influence that. And this is part of my initial conversation in any ask. Somebody says, I want you to help me with the effectiveness of my team. I have 17 direct reports. I'm going to say 17 is a deal breaker. Right? I'm not going to work with 17 people. I will work with you and them to reconfigure you so that you are the right size, so that the structure is right, so that they can be interdependent, et cetera. But this is what is on the table, right? From the first conversation, that if I am hamstrung around these, I cannot help you because all I will be doing is trying to work the processes and procedures and swimming upstream against a very strong current. And I think that takes courage from team leaders. I think it takes courage from us. But it's actually what the teams and the team members who are struggling under really poor conditions, that's what they need from us. So
Brilliant.
That's where I head. Go ahead, Jamie. I was going to share one last thing.
Go ahead, Ruth.
Okay. Here is, I'm just going to share a link for those of you who are stuck in these kinds of situations. And that is to, one of the things we at Six Conditions do, we train practitioners. We do train practitioners in the framework and certify them in the model, people who intervene in teams. But we also have, for precisely the reasons you guys have just named, have created an online course in team leadership that works from this framework. Teaches people all about the 6 conditions, teaches them how to execute a great team launch, teaches them how to do ongoing coaching. So my desire here was to put this knowledge into the hands of many more team leaders for the purposes of putting us in a position to be taking teams from good to great, rather than cleaning up messes that were created in the way that teams were designed and launched in the first place. So that's a resource for you if you find yourself running up against badly designed teams over and over again. And I certainly invite you to explore this stuff. And I will be sharing a set of slides with you after this talk, which Jamie can circulate to the group if you're interested in that that kind of work as well. Okay, that was the last thing from me for today. Please.
I think we just had one. We'll just do one more question because I think we're really running over time this time. Marco has one from the chat he'd like to bring up.
Yeah, Ruth, I really appreciate all your time and everybody's really enjoying this. Elizabeth had an earlier question really early on, and it was about how do you align an individual team's purpose what about team members who are not officially in the team, but they're integral to the success of the overall project's success? So they're not officially in the team.
Yeah,
they're like enablers.
Yeah, it can actually be a pretty healthy thing. So I talked about that excessive inclusiveness illustration earlier, where we have 15 people on a team. 15 people together cannot accomplish anything. It's much too difficult to coordinate that number. But to have a core team of, say, a handful, 5 people, who also have an accountability to get the perspectives from all the different parts of the organization is a way of being inclusive without destroying the team design. And so we see that having a core and then a set of contributing or peripheral or support members actually can be a very effective structure or design where those individuals are invited in to contribute where they can, but they need to know the team's purpose, right? They need to know, where does this team sit in the overall scheme of things? Where is its impact, and how can I individually contribute to that? We're often very, very good at onboarding. I know it's a made up word, but you know what I mean. Introducing people into a new job or a new role by being crystal clear about what's expected of the individuals and nothing at all about what it is that the team is there to accomplish or held accountable for, and what is expected of you as a member of that team. We always start with the individual, which I think is a fragmenting influence in teams, prevents people from collaborating because all the clarity actually exists in their individual accountabilities and not in why the team actually exists.
Love that response. Thank you. That was for Elizabeth on the recording. Okay, Jamie, over to you.
I just want to say thank you again, Ruth. This has been enlightening, certainly enlightening. And I have homework after much of this I have read ahead of time, but then hearing you talk about it, I'm like, oh, I've got some homework I need to do. So with my own team. So this was great, and I appreciate your time and your knowledge and all that you brought to us. So
you got it. I'm going to just put this up as people are leaving. We have lots and lots of free resources if you want to explore this framework on the website. We have a podcast that we do that walks through the whole framework and how we actually work with teams around it. So feel free to reach into that if you want to do some more exploring. I think actually hearing us talk about it and teach it is quite different from reading about it, because we share a lot more about the intervention practice on that. So if you want to explore more deeply, I would recommend the 60C podcast. Where we focus mainly on practice.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And for the rest of you, we'll share the video link. And Ruth, can we share the slides later?
Yes, I will. I'll send you a set of them to distribute to your members. Yep, glad to do it.
That would be great. So we'll get that out to you guys just as soon as possible. So thank you, everybody who came. And thanks for those who stuck around extra. And yeah, really great topic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Great ending.
Thank you.
Start, middle, wherever you're calling in from. Just have a great rest of your 24-hour period. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, be well.
So much. It was awesome.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you so much. Great meetup. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ruth. That was just so generous.
Very.
Entirely my pleasure. I'm serious about this being my mission, that eventually the work will be about helping people to accomplish even more rather than rescuing us from dysfunction.
Well, and I love that quote. I wrote that one down because that's so true. And I have one team like that now that we're just like, why isn't this working? And we have two teams working on the same project. Even they're working on the same product. One team is excelling, the other team is not. So why?
We pour all of our coaching energy into the ones that are not contributing or producing, right? Wouldn't it be so much better if what we were being was the accelerant of people who are already on a great trajectory? It's mutually energizing kinds of work, then
I really, especially like you can't coach them out of, you can't coach them to effectiveness, because in the animal world, we focus a lot on coaching. So I think if the conditions aren't right, the weather, check the weather. If it's not right, then, we can't control the weather. So we can control, though, is the team design.
One of the poll questions, I'll leave it in the slides, that I really enjoy asking is, when you think about the team leaders that you have worked with and the 60-30-10 rule, 60% design, 30% launch, 10% coaching. Where are the team leaders you work with actually putting their energy around design, launch, coach, or something else entirely? And invariably, the answer is completely short shrift on design, which means imperfect launch, which means a huge proportion of their time is spent on coaching, and it is all remedial. It's all about the things that have surfaced that are dysfunctional and how to kind of correct those.
Yeah, you've definitely given me a lot to noodle on here. But I have to think about how I want to approach my own leadership. I have a meeting Friday. That might be, 2 days.
I can just add that what that made me think of is the way that we retrospect and we actually ask what went well, what went not so well, what can we improve? And teams that focus just on the not went well so well, they're only fixing problems. But if we focus on the good, sometimes we can bring teams to the great, and all those little problems that we had just go away.
So now you're talking about a practice called appreciative inquiry, Marco. It's actually a thing. So if you read up on that, I've built retrospectives off of that approach on appreciative inquiry and have gotten much better responses from the team than when we're focusing on all the problems. But it took them a bit because they're so used to being focused on the problems that it wasn't like a quick switch to having them think in terms of appreciative inquiry and strengths management and things like that. But over time, they did make that switch. Yeah,
it's a very different mindset, detecting errors versus the appreciative inquiry. The one thing I would, just a friendly amendment to the questions you asked around a retrospective, is add the question, not just what went well, because that does focus people on the process, but what was working in our favor, like what was helping us to be effective. Because now you're focusing them on the conditions under which things go well, and put them in a position to understand and influence the conditions under which they operate as a team.